This will be titled Moses and Khidr, a Freudian / Quranic case study. Now, I decided to pick this narrative because I found it relatively, one, easy to apply Freudian concepts, and when I began to, it started to reveal a lot of what Freud has already surmounted. But also by doing this, you realize that this dialect between the unconscious and the conscious has always existed. The only thing is that it has existed in the form of mythological narrative from scripture or famous mythological stories throughout the history of our time of being here. And in this essay, I attempt to break everything down and see how I do my best to exploit how the unconscious and the unconscious have a conversation with each other in the symbols of Moses and Khidr. Alright, so I'll begin. This work aims to explain the dialect between the conscious and the unconscious, and how it reveals itself through a Quranic narrative. A case study of this sort has not been done to my knowledge concerning Islamic mythology. The complementary aim will expose how expansive and applicable Freud's concepts are in order to provide a new arena for understanding Islamic scripture under the scope of psychoanalysis. Among the many mythological stories that are told in the Quran, I specifically chose Surah Al-Kahf, the cave, for being the perfect chapter where the narrative of Moses and Khidr emerges. The historical context and the symbolic nature of Surah Al-Kahf is significant in the traditional practice of Islam, where it is recommended to read this surah every Friday, the universal day for all Muslim worship, as well as the famous allegory, Plato's Cave. From here we begin, in this surah, the cave, where we find the story of Moses and his search for the mysterious man of knowledge. Quote, "And remember, when Moses said to his young assistant, 'I will never give up until I reach the junction of the two seas, even if I travel for ages.'" End quote. I will now provide the foundational Freudian map to make sense of this line and the ones following. Moses symbolizes consciousness and his desire to reach, quote, "the junction of the two seas," end quote, which is representative of the meeting place between the conscious and the unconscious. The role of the young assistant either symbolizes Moses' libido or memory. I have reason to believe it is the latter. Quote, "Even if I travel for ages," end quote, is a powerful line that displays Moses' the conscious desire to know/find the unknown. But this is also historically true in the case of our own sciences, relentless pursuit to know the unknown. Quote, "But when they finally reached the point where the seas met, they forgot their salted fish, and it made its way into the sea, slipping away wondrously," end quote. Here is the first instance of the dialect between the conscious and the unconscious, where quite literally a Freudian slip, the fish slipping away, occurs. The symbolism of the salted fish represents something that was previously had, or to put it quite simply, a representation of a past experience that now slips away from consciousness, Moses. Quote, "When they had passed further, he said to his assistant, 'Bring us our meal. We have certainly been exhausted by today's journey.' End quote. This is the conscious Moses having a symbolic dialectical exchange with his memory assistant. Quote, he replied, "Do you remember when we rested by the rock? That is when I forgot the fish. None made me forget to mention this except Satan, and the fish made its way into the sea miraculously." End quote. The memory assistant reminds consciousness Moses about the last time they rested/slept, and that is when the memory assistant failed to recall a specific experience, the fish. This censoring or blocking seems to take the role of Satan, where Satan can prevent one from attempting to know the unknown, the unconscious. Quote, Moses responded, "That is exactly what we were looking for." So they returned, retracing their footsteps. End quote. The consciousness Moses now attempts to retrace and examine further where and why the blocking occurred. For this is the tell sign to Moses consciousness where one can meet the unconscious, Khidr. Quote, there they found a servant of ours to whom we had granted mercy from us and enlightened with knowledge of our own. Moses said to him, "May I follow you, provided that you teach me some of the right guidance you have been taught." End quote. In this specific line, Allah, God, is speaking about an enlightened one of our own. If we are entertaining that Khidr is the unconscious, then perhaps Allah is the unconscious that stays forever unknown, and that Khidr is the unconscious that is capable of being known. Now, the second line is the conscious Moses' realization and willingness to learn from the unconscious known, Khidr. Quote, he said, "You certainly cannot be patient enough with me." End quote. The unconscious known, Khidr, knows already that consciousness Moses will not be able to withstand what it will encounter. This is a future allusion to the repulsion the consciousness will experience. Quote, and how can you be patient with what is beyond your realm of knowledge? Moses assured him, "You will find me patient, Allah willing, and I will not disobey any of your orders." This displays consciousness Moses' naivety against the power of the unconscious known, Khidr. Quote, he responded, "Then if you follow me, do not question me about anything until I myself clarify it for you." End quote. The unconscious Khidr is willing to show conscious Moses that it should never assert that it knows more or better than the unconscious Khidr itself, until the unconscious Khidr has willingly chose to clarify, bring it forth to consciousness Moses. Quote, so they set out, but after they had boarded a ship, the man made a hole in it. Moses protested, "Have you done this to drown its people? You have certainly done a terrible thing." End quote. Here we already see consciousness Moses' immediate repulsion from the act of the unconscious, made known to the conscious, Khidr. Quote, he replied, "Did I not say that you cannot have patience with me?" End quote. The unconscious then reminds consciousness of its own unwillingness to confront what is needed to be confronted. Quote, Moses pleaded, "Excuse me for forgetting, and do not be hard on me." End quote. This line displays the constant dialectical tension of confronting what is repressed within. Consciousness Moses will continue to struggle against and forget in attempt to learn from the unconscious Khidr. I will fast forward here a bit and summarize that consciousness Moses ultimately could not bear the acts from the unconscious Khidr in the two additional instances of the narrative following. where repetitively Moses' consciousness promises to have patience, and Khidr, the unconscious, once again reminds him that he was correct in not being able to have patience with what he was teaching him. Quote, he replied, "This is the parting of our ways. I will explain to you what you could not bear patiently. As for the ship, it belonged to some poor people working at sea, so I intended to damage it, for there was a tyrant king ahead of them who seizes every good ship by force." Consciousness Moses' own failure to submit to the unconscious known, Khidr, results in the parting of their ways, where the failure to work with the unconscious will lead to the furthering of repressed ideas and possible neuroses. But the significance of this narrative is the mercy of the unconscious, Khidr, where he decides to bring forth the knowledge to consciousness Moses despite failure. It seems that the implicit overall message of this mythological story is that one must confront and attempt a relationship with the unconscious, for no matter how many times consciousness may fail into penetrating into the unconscious will eventually bring forth something to consciousness, and here lays its mercy and gift of having this continuous dialectical relationship and tension with the unconscious. And that's the end of my essay. I took this all from the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf, the cave. When I started really reflecting about the very fact that it's in a surah, a chapter, titled The Cave, and then it has this story, it really says a lot here about the interaction between the conscious and the unconscious. And actually a lot of the stories within the cave represent the dialectical exchange between the unconscious and conscious. But anyways, I hope you guys found that fruitful, and how we can use Freudian concepts to read a mythological narrative and actually still get something out of this that is beneficial without it being or having to feel relatively religious and so on. And of course, if you guys have any critiques and comments, I welcome them all. All right, guys, take care.